Partnerships and relationships.
You can see that line.
This is our level 2 galleries, and which is now a space dedicated to the MCA Collection. So the MCA Collection begins in 1989, so it's not the Power Collection, which is the precursor to it, but it's the MCA Collection, begins in 1989 up until the present. So this is the first time where we've had a dedicated space of this scale for the MCA Collection. So it's quite an exciting moment. Here we have a work by Stephen Birch. It's Untitled Spider-Man. And when we were doing the MCA Collection hang, we brought together a group of people to work on it. So as the curator, I suppose I sort of proposed ideas, but it was putting together a group of people to look at the collection and then to start to knock back and forth some of those ideas. And one of the things that we decided to do, and myself and the registrar sort of set out as a project to do it, the registrar Claire Campy, was to look at every single thing in the MCA collection. So there's something like 4,500 items, which might seem like a lot, but it's actually quite achievable. If you set yourself a goal to look at everything, you can actually do it. And it was quite a fantastic process to really get in there amongst it and have a look at what was there and some of the great things that came out of it. So this work has become almost like a sort of mascot in a sense, because I think it's very much about looking, this encounter between two people, Spider-Man, who's sort of looking up at this twisted little sort of elfin face that's poking out of the wall, and they're looking at each other. Now Spider-Man's confused, but I think that little bearded guy's confused as well. And I always like to think that the MCA is a little bit like Peter Parker, who is Spider-Man, that the MCA is a sort of mixed up teen heading into adulthood, and here we are, we have this new building, so we have sort of superpowers. So that's that's my Spider-Man analogy. So we did start to build those spaces in the new floor, and I hope people have been to see the spaces. We started to build them thematically, and we had them in these quite clearly defined spaces, because we realised that building an exhibition, or a hang, sorry, Lizanne, building a hang, we can't call it an exhibition, building a hang of the collection, it was something we couldn't do. We couldn't attempt to do this chronological hang, and I think that's sort of a bit boring as well. So we decided to do these thematic hangs, which were quite strictly controlled up until maybe 3 or 4 months out. Lizanne said, and I think this was actually a fantastic moment where the show really got really loose, was actually get rid of the themes now. We spent all this time building up the show. We sort of were depending on these themes. She said, well, get rid of the themes. So we did, and it actually loosened it up a lot, and I think that's what's made it interesting. Themes still exist on this collection floor. Some are quite obvious and some are not. This room in particular started off as sort of the domestic gone crazy in a smaller room, but then when it was moved to a bigger room, it was like the domestic gone sort of extra crazy. In the centre is a piece by Robert McPherson called I See a Can of Paint as a Painting Unpainted, and it's literally a can of paint next to a chair. That's the sort of work that if I show my parents that that's contemporary art, they really sort of freak out and wonder what I'm doing. Right in front of you are 2 works by John Murrengel, which are actually the first 2 works that were ever purchased by the MCA. So they're number 1 and number 2 in this beautiful big ledger that our registrar keeps. And this room is sort of based around the idea of mysticism and spirituality. And look, I won't go into things too much, but just to say, the Judith Wright piece on the floor was one of the works that we really found out of this idea of looking. Myself and the registrar, Claire, we were looking at everything, pulling everything out. And of course, what this is a series of images of hands on vellum. So the pages turn and you get these beautiful overlaps. It's got this really beautiful materiality. But it's the sheets, it's an artist's book, but it's quite big. You need almost 2 people to handle it. And when it's closed, they're actually, the covers of the book are masonite, brown masonite. So when we're looking in the catalogue, we see this image of brown masonite and we sort of think, oh, not another one. And then we actually got it out of the box, and it was this beautiful, huge object. It was so much more than what we imagined it would be. So that was one of those works that we sort of discovered through looking again at the collection. This is a space dedicated to abstraction. I will point out one really interesting thing. If you want to walk around the MCA Collection floor and do a count based on gender, it's almost 50-50. It's very close. There's variables, and if I explain the variables, there's the group of bark paintings, which are all by men. And then there's a group of baskets which are all by women. So if you actually take those two things out, there's 54 women and 53 men. So I'm very pleased about that. If you add them, it's something like 86 women, 94 men. So we really watch that. Now that's a really important thing, because I think you need to make sure that those mixes are ethical and equitable, and you also need to put on a really good hang. And it was quite an easy thing to do, really. Shouldn't be a challenge. Most museums should sort of set those targets, so I don't think they all are. So it's I like to point it out. This is Sean Gladwell's storm sequence, and look, I know I put the show together, but I don't think that work's ever looked better until it was in this exhibition. It's got a real sculptural feel to it, so the work is there. We were very lucky when we were doing the museum that Andrew and Kathy Cameron Collectors here in Sydney gave us an amazing collection of video work, and this was one of those works. And I think this is a video piece which really changed the direction of Australian video art in the past 10 years. I think it's this sort of pivotal moment and pivotal work where things sort of changed in terms of video's fortune, so it's a really great piece to have. And there's this motif of spinning as well, which is happening in the collection floor too, which is sort of dotted throughout the spaces. You'll find these videos where quite often someone's moving through 360 degrees, or there's a group of bark paintings where it's a rainbow serpent sort of turning in on itself. So that sort of spiral replicates you as you're sort of walking through the space too, as you walk through in a circle. In that abstraction room is a work there by Richard Bell. I just went blank then for a minute. It's Richard Bell, and it's called Worth Exploring. And it's a great piece because that idea of abstraction and non-Indigenous and Indigenous artists is a problematic one. To actually bring those two things together, I'm not saying that is necessarily the right thing to do. And Richard Bell's piece sort of cuts in there almost to contradict our own hang, which I think is something that contemporary art should. I think that contradiction sort of is within the floor, and Richard sort of pointing out the shortfalls of that methodology of putting the two things together. So I think it's good to have that sort of denial and affirmation at the same time. To the left is a work by Gordon Bennett, which actually is the view out the window. So it's a piece called Display. It's untitled, but it uses words like dismay, displace, disperse, about the Indigenous people and about the landing of Arthur Phillip actually at Circular Quay. So that's there. And then to the right, this amazing work by Juan de Vila, Sentimental History of Australian Art. And here we've got a room sort of looking at the idea of appropriation. And we're moving very fast now. How are we going? We're okay? This is the last room. It's a piece by Fiona Hall. It's called Give a Dog a Bone. And it's a series of objects that she's carved out of yellow soap, sort of toxic smelling soap. And this is a room that's sort of looking at the idea of sculpture and about artists making sort of one-to-one versions and that another sort of uncanny replication of things. But look, I encourage people, if they haven't, to come along to see the exhibitions. Talking about shows like this is quite, you're a bit distant from it, but I hope people have been. And again, another room, this is about portraiture. And when you actually come into the space, the first thing that you see, along with Spider-Man, is a whole idea of looking at the idea of portraiture and people looking back at you as you're in those spaces. That's it. So I think we're going to questions.